I believe the Great Reset is laying the infrastructure of the mark of the beast and one world government of the tribulation period, which will be ruled by the Antichrist. These are the 5 steps of the Great Reset and the plans the elites have for you and your family. Step 1, they will see everything. We can't keep the plebs in line, they say, if we don't know what they're up to each second of the day. We need to see everything. Once we have that intel, then we have the data to start rewarding or punishing them to ensure they remain obedient to government. That's why we've been developing the perfect solution, a digital ID. Instead of the plebs carrying their normal ID or passport, they will soon have a digital ID that will be used for every aspect of their life, to access health care and other necessary services, to check in hotels and book airline flights. They will use their digital ID to pay their taxes. Everything will be connected to this digital ID, all for their quote-unquote safety, of course. They will justify this with the argument that most of us have one email we use for our entire online lives, so why not have the equivalent of it for our physical lives? As Klaus Schwab said, quote, "In the near future, similar monitoring systems will also be applied to the movement and tracking of people," unquote, from where you go when you shop, to what you eat and drink, to the places you go, the trips you take. They will track your behavior every second of the day to compile your habits. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. This sounds way too unbelievable. This could never happen. Oh, but it has already happened. All you have to do is look to our neighbors in the East. Let's say China. In China, everything you do is tied to your identity, your airline flights, your train rides, shopping habits, behavior in general. It's all overseen by the quote-unquote gracious Chinese Communist Party, which gives them some very efficient methods of social control. And guess who is a huge fan of China? Klaus Schwab, of course. Schwab thinks China's doing a great job, and that in the future, we should model our Western world based on Chinese values, such as China's social credit score. Here's him introducing the president of China, Xi Jinping, at the Davos Agenda of 2022.
China has made significant economic and social achievements under your leadership. We now welcome His Excellency Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China.
But we can't stop at just knowing what our plebs are up to every second. They say, no, we got to continue following China's path. See, once you have the data on what your plebs are doing, now you need to give them some way of knowing if they're being obedient enough or not. The plebs need some kind of feedback loop to see how well they're doing, which brings us to step 2 of the Great Reset. Step 2, the scorecard, also known as the social credit score. The system is simple. It's like training a pet, but for the masses. Simply set up the rules for your citizens, track and measure their actions. If their actions are within the rules, increase their score. If not, decrease their score. But when we talk about rules, we're not talking as much about basic rules like do not steal. The masses, for the most part, already understand and follow those rules. We're instead talking about quote-unquote behavior. If you protest against the government, your score will drop. If you live too lavishly, your score will drop. An alternative, or maybe an early version of the social credit score, is the so-called carbon footprint tracker. But here's the thing. A scorecard is useless if there are not any rewards or punishments for their actions. So after we have a score, we need to create the carrot and the stick to keep the plebs in line. Step 3, now they say, it's time to add some rewards and punishments for your plebs' actions. Maybe they're eating too much meat, so they block their access to certain restaurants and block them from shopping for meat at the grocery and through other channels. After all, meat is bad for the environment, right? If they see them buying too many books that are critical of the government, they block their Audible and Kindle accounts. Maybe a big protest is breaking out in a certain area, and the plebs are trying to travel to it to participate. They will simply lock them out of ride-sharing apps and from buying tickets for airline flights and trains, similar to what China did to people who were trying to protest when banks froze their accounts. In this particular case, the Chinese government relied on their citizens' COVID contact tracing. During COVID, each citizen had to sign up for an app that would track their COVID status and whether or not they had ever been in contact with anyone who had tested positive for the virus. If their profile was green, they have not been exposed to anyone with COVID and can travel and go to work. But if their code was yellow or red, they cannot shop, use public transport, or go to work. When the bank protests broke out, they changed everyone's COVID status to red. That way, none of them were able to travel or gather to protest. Handy, right? But China takes it further than just using this for extreme cases like protesting. Every year, China bans millions of its citizens from buying plane tickets because their social credit score is too low. And in some cases, even their children aren't allowed into good schools, just because their parents did something the government sees as bad behavior. In China, if you don't play by the government's rules, they will turn you and your family into social outcasts. And this dystopian future isn't even as far away from here as most of us believe. It looks like Italy is rolling out Europe's first social credit score system this year. Quote-unquote good citizens will get rewarded for doing things such as separating their trash for recycling and using public transportation instead of using their own car, conserving energy in their home, and other things. Their new social credit program only includes rewards for now, no punishments yet, and when it rolls out, other cities are sure to follow. But there's one more key step to gaining full control over society. Money. Step 4, control the money. Today, many of us already pay by swiping our credit and debit cards or phones over some electronic device. So most of our monetary transactions are already being tracked. But there is still a lot of cash in use around the world, which the World Economic Forum and other key elites don't like that at all. Why? Because cash is offline. They can't see what people are buying. If it's in cash, plebs could withdraw $50 from their bank account and buy a banned book, for crying out loud. This is a big no-no. So another goal of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab is to introduce a single digital currency to be used all over the world, kind of like Bitcoin, but with a key difference. Unlike Bitcoin, which is completely decentralized, their digital currency will be fully centralized. It is called Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, and they're working on this as we speak. This digital currency, CBDC, would still live on the blockchain, so every single transaction will be on there forever and can't be deleted. But any sense of anonymity will go straight out the window. Every transaction throughout the entire economy will be tracked and analyzed like never before, and this CBDC will be managed by a central authority, and it would still allow them to do quote-unquote neat things like print money on demand. And if the plebs spend money on things that are against the government's agenda, they say, we could freeze their bank account. We already saw an example of this when during the truckers' protest in Canada, the truckers went against the system, they spoke their opinions, and the government froze their bank accounts. So we already know world leaders want to be able to do this. A central bank digital currency would just make it a whole lot more efficient. But it doesn't stop there. In addition to their cash, according to the WEF and Great Reset agenda, plebs still have one source of economic power that they need to take from them: property. This brings us to step 5 of the Great Reset, the abolition of property rights. Klaus Schwab and the WEF predict that by 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Plebs won't own a vehicle. They won't own a home. They won't even own their cookware. Don't believe me? Here's an actual quote from an article the World Economic Forum wrote in Forbes magazine titled, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." Here is a quote from this article. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense to us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we don't need it. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there. Shopping? I can't really remember what that is. Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy, nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere everything I do, think and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. All in all, it is a good life, unquote. Ah yes, life will be quote-unquote good. When governments and megacorporations own literally everything, no citizen owns any private property, and their entire life is at the mercy of those who do own the property. Kind of like feudalism, but they say you'll be safe and secure. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. According to them, everything will be for your convenience and protection, and if this argument doesn't convince the plebs, they'll trick them with climate change and accuse them of slowly destroying the planet through pollution. Another quote from the article says, "All in all, it is a good life, much better than the path we were on, where it becomes so clear that we could not continue with the same model of growth. We had all these terrible things happening, like climate change and environmental degradation." Unquote. But behind closed doors, you and I know that the WEF and Great Reset agenda is all about power and control. The Great Reset is laying the infrastructure of the mark of the beast and one world government of the tribulation period, which will be ruled by the Antichrist. If you haven't already, confess your sins, ask Jesus Christ to forgive you for your sins, and ask Jesus Christ to save you so you will be taken up in the rapture spoken of in 1 Corinthians 15:52, and will not be left behind during the tribulation period to meet the Antichrist and his mark.